At my daughter's wedding reception, her new husband, Jason, lifted his champagne flute, gestured in my direction, and made a joke about my so-called meaningless life. The room, filled with his wealthy friends and family, erupted in laughter. My Chloe simply ducked her head in embarrassment. But then, her father-in-law, Arthur, made his way toward me, his eyes wide with astonishment, and asked if I would give him my autograph. He had recognized me for who I truly was. Jason's voice had sliced through the air in my living room like shattered glass just a few weeks prior. "Aunt Evelyn," he'd started, "we know things might be a little tight for you financially, but this wedding is everything to Chloe." I was sitting in my old, worn leather armchair, the same one I'd sat in for 20 years, my checkbook already open on my lap. My pen was trembling just slightly in my hand. 20 years of this chair, 20 years of comforting chats with my daughter. Now, she was standing near the window, her expensive designer heels clicking restlessly on my scuffed hardwood floors as she shifted her weight. "I want to contribute," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "That's the reason you're here, isn't it?" Jason paced back and forth in front of my coffee table, the afternoon sun glinting off his high-end watch. Every so often, his gaze would sweep over my modest furniture, the faded couch Robert and I had purchased from a second-hand store, the scratched coffee table that Chloe had used as her personal canvas for crayon drawings as a little girl. His expression was all too easy to read. "The venue alone is costing $35,000, he went on, glancing at his watch again. "And Dad is already handling the catering, the live band, and all the flowers. How much do you need from me?" I interrupted, already bracing myself for a number that would feel like a punch. Chloe finally turned away from the window. For a fleeting second, I saw my little girl in her face, the one who would climb into this very armchair, with a stack of picture books. Then, just as quickly, her expression hardened back into that of a stranger. "50,000 would be a tremendous help," she said, her voice quiet. The number landed like a physical blow. I looked down at my checkbook, my aging hand suddenly feeling every one of my 65 years. The balance stared back at me. 23? 16. It was everything. My entire life's savings, built up penny by painstaking penny since Robert passed away. 20,000, I said, tearing the check from the book with deliberate care. "This is everything I have. Every last cent of my savings." A heavy silence descended upon the room, stretching between the three of us like a vast canyon. Jason stopped his pacing, his mouth slightly agape. Then, he let out a laugh. It wasn't a cruel sound, just one of genuine, unadulterated surprise. "Seriously? My father is spending more than that on the floral arrangements alone." A flush of heat crept up my neck. "It's what I can offer." "Evelyn?" "Aunt Evelyn," Jason corrected himself, his tone shifting to something that could have been mistaken for pity. "I do appreciate the gesture. I really do. But we're planning a real wedding here. Chloe deserves more than this." His wave of the hand seemed to encompass my entire existence, the framed family photos on the mantelpiece, the stack of unpaid bills on my desk, the cup of coffee that was growing cold beside me, everything I had ever worked for, everything I had managed to save, was dismissed with a single, casual gesture. "Jason?" Chloe's voice cut in, sharp as a whip. But she wasn't coming to my defense. She was cautioning him, warning him to choose his words more carefully. "Look," Jason continued, his voice softer now, which somehow felt more dangerous. "We both know you're getting by on Social Security and whatever small pension you have left from your music career. This isn't about accepting charity. This is about what Chloe needs to secure her future." I held the check out to him anyway, my signature still damp on the bottom line. $20,000. It represented 4 months of my income. The money I had been carefully setting aside for emergencies, for repairs on this old house, for the inevitable medical expenses that would come with age. Jason made no move to take it. "Keep it," he said gently. "Perhaps you can use it to fix that leak in your roof." The words hung in the air between us like a thick fog. I had never mentioned the leak to anyone. He had noticed it on his own. The small, faint water stain on my ceiling, barely perceptible unless you were specifically looking for it. In the 15 minutes he had been in my home, he had mentally catalogued every one of my failures and shortcomings. Chloe was already moving toward the door, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "We should get going." "Chloe!" I stood up. The check still held out between us. "Honey, please." She paused with her hand on the doorknob. For a hopeful heartbeat, I thought she might turn around, that she might remember who I was to her, what we had once been to each other. "We'll find another way," she said without looking back at me. "Don't worry about it." The front door opened, and the sounds of street traffic flooded the quiet room. Jason followed her out, pausing just long enough to glance back at me with a look that might have been sympathy. "Thanks for the offer, Aunt Evelyn." Then they were gone. The sound of their car doors slamming shut was followed by the roar of an engine fading into the distance. I stood there alone in my empty living room, holding a check for 20 that no one wanted. The silence in the house was so profound, it felt like it was pressing on my eardrums. I placed the check down on the coffee table and watched as it fluttered in the gentle breeze from the air conditioner. $20,000, rendered completely worthless by a few carelessly spoken words. Outside, Jason's BMW turned the corner and disappeared from sight, taking my daughter with it. I sank back into my armchair, the old leather groaning under my weight. The house suddenly felt different, smaller, as if the walls themselves had closed in on me during their visit. Every familiar object now seemed to mock me. The smiling family photos on the mantel, the guitar case collecting dust in the corner, the ever-present stack of bills that never seemed to get any smaller. My phone buzzed on the side table. The sound was so jarring in the stillness that it made me jump. I fumbled for my reading glasses and squinted at the illuminated screen. It was a text message from Chloe. "Don't bother coming to the wedding. We don't need your charity." I read the message once, then twice, then a third time, hoping the words would somehow change. My fingers trembled as I tried to call her back, but the call went directly to her voicemail. Her recorded voice, so cheerful and professional, instructed me to leave a message after the tone. I couldn't find the words to speak. The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering onto the coffee table next to the rejected check. A tightness gripped my chest, and each breath became a struggle. This was about more than just money now. This was about the terrifying possibility of losing the only family I had left. I picked the phone up again and began to type a reply. "Chloe, honey, I love you. Please don't do this. Delete. I was just trying to help. I'm sorry if... Delete. Can we please talk? Please. Delete." Nothing I wrote felt adequate. Nothing could convey the hollow ache that was spreading through me, or the sheer disbelief that my own daughter, my sweet little girl, could cut me out of her life so coldly and completely. The text message felt like her words, but they were sharper, crueler than she had ever been, even during her most difficult teenage years. It had to be Jason's influence. Or maybe this was simply who she had become, and I had been too blind to notice. The afternoon sun shifted, casting long, dark shadows across my living room floor. In the distance, a neighbor's lawnmower hummed to life, a normal suburban sound that felt like it was coming from a different universe. I just sat there, clutching my phone, staring at her message, waiting for something, anything, to make sense again. But it didn't. The check lay forgotten on the table, my signature already starting to fade in the sunlight. All that money, all those months of scrimping and saving, were now utterly meaningless, not because the amount wasn't enough, but because they didn't want it, because they didn't want me. The old house creaked around me as it settled into the evening. I knew I should get up, make some dinner, do something to occupy myself for the rest of my Saturday, but I remained frozen in my chair, holding a phone that felt as heavy as a stone, reading the same brutal message over and over again, until the words blurred and lost all meaning. Don't bother coming to our wedding. My daughter's wedding. The day I had been eagerly anticipating for months, despite my reservations about Jason. The day I had dreamed of walking her down the aisle, of giving a speech about how proud her father, Robert, would have been, of dancing with her just like we used to when she was a little girl and stood on my feet. All of it, gone, erased by 15 words on a screen. I finally set the phone down and walked over to the mantel, my legs feeling unsteady. The collection of family photos waited there like old friends, their faces frozen in happier times. My fingers gently traced the edge of the largest frame. Chloe at 3 years old, with Robert holding her on his lap, and me in the background, strumming my old acoustic guitar. We looked so happy, so complete. Then, a memory surfaced, unbidden, teaching a 5-year-old Chloe to ride her bicycle in our old driveway. Robert was cheering from the porch steps, his hands cupped around his mouth. "You've got it, baby girl. You've got it." And then Chloe's triumphant laughter as she finally pedaled away on her own, wobbling but full of determination, her training wheels spinning uselessly in the air. I picked up another photograph. A beach vacation in 1998. The three of us were building a massive sandcastle, our hands caked with wet sand. Robert was wearing his favorite yellow polo shirt, the one that made his eyes look as warm as honey. Chloe, maybe 8 years old at the time, had sand in her hair and the biggest, brightest smile I had ever seen. Muscle memory guided my feet toward the kitchen. I filled the kettle with shaking hands. The simple, familiar task helped to ground me in the present moment. But even here, surrounded by the mundane objects of everyday life, the memories followed. Robert patiently braiding Chloe's hair for her first day of school, his large, gentle fingers moving with surprising quickness and skill. "Hold still, sweetheart," he would say. "We want you to look perfect." And me at the stove, flipping pancakes into funny shapes, Mickey Mouse ears, lopsided hearts, anything to make our nervous 6-year-old smile. The kettle whistled, and I poured the hot water over a tea bag, watching the liquid darken as I inhaled the familiar scent of Earl Grey. It had been Robert's favorite. He used to make a pot for us every single evening before we all settled onto the couch for our family movie night. There would be a big wooden bowl of popcorn, blankets tangled around our feet, and the three of us playfully arguing over what movie to watch. "She gets that stubborn streak from you, Evelyn," Robert would whisper to me during Chloe's teenage years, after she had stormed upstairs over some perceived injustice. But even then, even after the most heated arguments, Chloe would eventually creep back downstairs, curl up next to Robert on the couch, and allow herself to be forgiven. I carried my tea back to the mantel, studying each photograph as if it were a piece of evidence in a crime. Here was the proof that we had been happy once. Here was Chloe at 16, wearing her graduation cap askew, hugging both of her parents with genuine, heartfelt affection. "I love you guys," she had said that day. "I love you so much." When did that change? When did I become someone whose love was seen as charity, whose presence was an unwelcome burden? After Robert died. Most likely, the funeral and the terrible, grief-stricken months that followed. Chloe had started to pull away from me then, as if I were somehow contaminated by my sorrow. She was 25 at the time, old enough to understand loss, but perhaps too young to forgive me for my inability to fill the enormous void her father had left behind. I wasn't enough. Without Robert as our center, our glue, Chloe and I had drifted apart like two pieces of debris from a shipwreck. floating in opposite directions. I picked up the most recent photo of the three of us, taken at Robert's last birthday, just 2 months before his diagnosis. We had gone to his favorite Italian restaurant, shared a bottle of red wine, and laughed until our sides ached. In the picture, Robert's head is resting on my shoulder, while Chloe leans across the table, reaching for her father's hand. We looked so invincible in that picture. We looked like a family that nothing could ever break. The clock on the mantel chimed 5 o'clock. Had I really been standing here for over an hour? The tea in my hands had grown cold. The light outside had softened into the warm glow of evening, and I was still holding this photograph, still trying to piece together how everything had gone so terribly wrong. 3 smiling faces stared back at me from inside the frame, a complete family, blissfully unaware of the pain that was waiting for them just around the corner. I could almost hear Robert's laugh echoing from behind the glass, and Chloe's young voice calling out, "Mommy!" from some distant summer afternoon. But the silence in the house was now absolute, broken only by the steady ticking of the clock and the creaks of the old wood. The check still lay on the coffee table, a forgotten piece of paper. The phone remained mercifully silent, and I stood there, surrounded by the ghosts of better days, holding the proof of what we used to be, and wondering if I would ever see my daughter smile at me like that again. The happy family photo slipped from my fingers, and I picked up another one, taken 2 years later. Robert looked so thin in this one, his cheekbones sharp beneath his translucent skin. His smile was brave, but his eyes were so tired. The plastic hospital bracelet around his wrist caught the light. I remembered the sterile, antiseptic smell that clung to everything during those long months. The endless, brightly lit corridors, the constant beeping of machines that seemed to keep rhythm with my own terrified heartbeat. I remembered holding Robert's hand, feeling how cold and fragile it was, as the doctor spoke words that felt like heavy stones in my mouth. "Stage 3, he had said, adjusting his glasses. "We've caught it early enough to begin treatment, but it's an aggressive form." Robert squeezed my fingers so tightly I thought they might break. Chloe sat beside us, 28 years old but looking like a lost child, her face pale with shock. She hadn't said a word during the entire appointment. She just stared at the X-rays on the light board as if she could will them to change. The chemotherapy sessions all blurred together, driving Robert to the hospital every Tuesday and Thursday, watching his hair fall out in clumps, pretending not to notice when he had to throw up in the parking lot afterward. He wore scarves and hats, always kept his chin up, and even made jokes with the nurses. But at home, when he thought I wasn't looking, I would catch him staring at his reflection in the mirror, with an expression of despair I had never seen before. Chloe's visits became less and less frequent as the months went on. She said work was busy, that the traffic was terrible. She had a life of her own to live. But I saw the real reason in her eyes. Whenever she looked at her father, terror. It was the pure, undiluted fear of watching the most important person in her world slowly disappear, piece by piece. "She's so young to be going through this," Robert whispered to me one evening, as we watched Chloe hurry away after a brief 10-minute visit. I should have had more time with her. The final weeks were the hardest. Our bedroom became crowded with hospice equipment, oxygen tanks, medication schedules, and a hospital bed that seemed to swallow Robert whole. Chloe came every day then, but she spent most of her time in the kitchen, washing dishes that were already clean, or reorganizing cabinets that didn't need it. "Why couldn't you save him?" Chloe's voice was barely a whisper over the sounds of mourners filing past Robert's casket. It wasn't an accusation, just the broken question of a daughter who had always believed her mother could fix anything. I tried to hug her at the funeral, but she stepped away from my embrace, wrapping her arms around herself instead. She was wearing my black dress, the one I'd worn to our last dinner out together, and she looked so much like me that it made my chest ache. The days following the funeral stretched on endlessly. I would find Chloe sitting in Robert's armchair, holding his reading glasses or his favorite coffee mug, but she would stiffen the moment I entered the room, as if my very presence was a painful reminder of everything we had both lost, everything I had failed to protect. "She's going to need you more than ever," Robert had told me during one of his last lucid moments. "Don't let her push you away, Evelyn. She's going to try, but you can't let her." But I did. I let her. Every time Chloe pulled back, every time she made an excuse not to visit, every time she looked through me instead of at me, I let her go. I told myself that she needed space to grieve, that pushing her would only drive her further away. Now, as I held this photograph of Robert's final Christmas with us, I could finally see the truth I had been avoiding for so long. Chloe hadn't just lost her father that day. She had lost her faith in me, too. She had lost the belief that I could protect the people we loved, that I was strong enough to hold our family together without Robert at its center. The photograph trembled in my hands. Robert's eyes stared back at me, still bright with hope, despite the illness that was ravaging his body. He had trusted me to take care of our daughter, and I had failed him. I had failed them both. I placed Robert's photograph back on the mantel and walked into the kitchen, muscle memory guiding me through a familiar ritual, making coffee. I took out Robert's old ceramic mugs, the ones with tiny chips along the rims that we had never bothered to replace. The routine felt hollow now, like I was performing a play for an empty theater. Steam rose from the fresh pot as I poured, the rich aroma filling the silence. But instead of bringing me comfort, the smell only brought back another memory. The first time Jason had visited our home. Chloe had been so nervous that day, constantly straightening couch cushions that were already perfectly arranged, and checking her reflection in the bathroom mirror at least 3 times. I had made my famous lasagna, the recipe Robert had perfected over 20 years of Sunday family dinners. "So, this is where Chloe grew up." Jason's voice had carried a tone I couldn't quite place at first. Cozy. The word hung in the air like a puff of smoke. Not small, not modest, but cozy. My entire life reduced to a single, patronizing syllable. He had walked through our living room with the careful precision of someone touring a museum, his eyes cataloging every worn piece of furniture, every faded family photo, every visible sign of the life Robert and I had built together over 3 decades. "We should probably go out to eat," he had suggested when I invited him to stay for dinner. "There's a great new place downtown. You'd love it, Ms. Grant." Chloe had agreed immediately. "That sounds wonderful, Mom. Maybe we should try something new, something new." As if 30 years of Sunday lasagna dinners were something to be ashamed of. Something to be outgrown. I watched them leave from my kitchen window, Jason's hand on Chloe's back, guiding her toward his sleek BMW. Through the glass, I could hear him saying something about the neighborhood, about property values, about other areas with more potential. The visits that followed became shorter and less frequent. When they did come, Jason would make casual observations that felt like tiny paper cuts, precise little wounds that didn't bleed but never seemed to heal. My father always says a person's worth is measured by what they provide. He'd mentioned one evening, glancing around our modest living room, "Success leaves clues." You know, Chloe had started looking at our house differently after that. I would catch her noticing things she had never seemed to see before. The water stain on the ceiling, the threadbare spots on the carpet, the way the kitchen faucet dripped, no matter how tightly I turned the handle. "Don't you want something better than this?" I overheard Jason ask her one afternoon as they stood in our driveway. Better than this? Better than the home, where she had learned to walk, where Robert had read her bedtime stories, where we had celebrated every single birthday and holiday for 30 years. "Maybe Mom should consider downsizing," Chloe had said during one of their visits. "This place is getting to be too much for her to maintain on her own." She had been looking at Jason when she said it, as if seeking his approval. My daughter, who used to defend me against playground bullies, was now suggesting I abandon the home Robert and I had chosen together. The place where every room was filled with memories of our life as a family. I should have fought back then. I should have reminded Chloe of the Sunday mornings when she would climb into bed between Robert and me, of the garden where her father had taught her the names of all the flowers, of the kitchen where we had made pancakes shaped like butterflies for her birthday every single year. Instead, I had just smiled politely and offered them coffee in Robert's chipped mugs. The coffee in my hands had grown cold as I stood there, lost in these painful memories. Outside the kitchen window, my neighbor was mowing his lawn. The steady drone of the engine seemed to be coming from another world. A normal Saturday afternoon in a normal suburban neighborhood, while my life was quietly falling apart, one polite conversation at a time. Jason had won without ever declaring war. He had simply shown Chloe a different version of success, one where love was measured in dollar signs and a person's worth was calculated by the square footage of their home. And I had been too lost in my grief, too polite, too afraid of losing what little I had left of my daughter to fight for her respect. 6 days crawled by after that brutal text message, each one blending into the next, like watercolors in the rain. On Sunday morning, I made my first attempt to call Chloe, but her phone went straight to voicemail. That cheerful, professional recording felt like another slap in the face. "Hi, sweetheart. It's Mom. I just wanted to..." The beep cut me off before I could finish. I stared at my phone, wondering if 30 seconds was enough time to say everything I needed to say, or if 30 years wouldn't be sufficient. Monday and Tuesday followed the same painful pattern. One call each day, straight to voicemail, leaving messages that grew increasingly desperate. "Chloe, please call me back. I love you, honey. We need to talk about this." By Wednesday, I stopped calling altogether. Instead, I threw myself into cleaning the corners of the house I had been avoiding since Robert died. The closets filled with his belongings that I couldn't bear to sort through. His cologne still lingered on the shirts I never had the strength to donate. His reading glasses still sat on the nightstand beside our bed, as if waiting for him to return. Thursday was spent drafting text messages that I would type and then delete, over and over again. I even wrote a letter by hand, but I couldn't bring myself to mail it. My handwriting looked shaky and old. Nothing like the confident script that used to sign autographs for the fans who remembered my band's brief moment of success. Friday morning found me in Robert's garden, pulling weeds from around his rose bushes. My hands moved automatically, muscle memory guiding me through the careful instructions he had given me in summers past. "Not too close to the roots, Evelyn. You have to give them room to breathe." The dirt felt good under my fingernails. It was honest work that required nothing but my attention and care. The afternoon sun was warm on my shoulders when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was probably another telemarketer, or maybe the pharmacy reminding me to pick up my blood pressure medication. I almost ignored it, but something made me check. Maybe it was hope, maybe it was habit, or maybe it was just the desperate part of me that still believed in miracles. "Mom, can we meet and talk? I'm sorry about everything." I had to read the message 3 times before the words registered, and a 4th time before I could believe them. My fingers trembled as I typed back, deleting and retyping until the response felt just right. "Of course, sweetheart. When and where?" Her reply came almost immediately. "The corner bean on Oak Avenue. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. I'll be there." I set the phone down carefully, as if any sudden movement might shatter this fragile new possibility. Then I walked inside and stood in front of the bathroom mirror, studying the face that looked back at me. Graying stubble, deeper lines around my eyes, and a noticeable weight loss that made my shirts hang loosely around my shoulders. Would she notice how much I had aged in just 6 days? Should I try to dress up, to look more like the mother she remembered, instead of the broken woman I had become? The printed text message crinkled in my shirt pocket when I touched it. Proof that this wasn't another dream, another wishful fantasy born from too much solitude and regret. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock, I would see my daughter again. Tomorrow, maybe we could begin to find our way back to each other. I arrived 15 minutes early, as I always do. I sat at a corner table in the Sunset Bistro, checking my watch for the 4th time in 2 minutes. The cafe was humming with Saturday morning energy, young professionals on laptops, families with strollers, the kind of place where a single cup of coffee cost more than I used to spend on groceries for a week. I smoothed down the collar of my shirt, the same navy blue button-down I had worn to Robert's funeral. It was clean and pressed, but it was starting to show its age around the cuffs. When Chloe walked through the glass doors at exactly 2 o'clock, I felt my chest tighten with relief. She looked beautiful and expensive. Her designer purse alone probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check, but her eyes held the uncertainty of a child who had broken something precious and wasn't sure if forgiveness was even possible. "Mom." Her voice caught slightly. "Thank you for coming, sweetheart." I stood up too quickly, nearly knocking over my coffee. "Of course I came." We shared an awkward hug across the small table, her perfume unfamiliar and sophisticated. When we sat down, a silence stretched between us, like a chasm that neither of us knew how to cross. "Your coffee is getting cold," she said, nodding at my untouched cup. "I was nervous," I admitted. "I didn't want to spill it when you arrived." That earned me a small smile, the first genuine one I had seen from her in months. "Mom, I am so sorry about everything. The way I treated you. That horrible text message. Chloe, honey, all that matters is that we're talking now." "No, let me finish." She leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly around her latte. "I was cruel, unforgivably cruel. And the things Jason said, about your house, about your situation. He was right, though. I can't provide what you deserve." "Stop." Her voice was firm now, reminiscent of Robert when he had made up his mind about something. "You gave me everything that mattered. Love, stability, a childhood filled with memories I will always treasure. Jason understands that now. He feels terrible about what he said. He wants to apologize to you personally." I nodded, though something twisted in my stomach. People like Jason didn't typically have sudden pangs of conscience. But maybe I was being unfair. Maybe the stress of planning a wedding had made everyone say things they didn't mean. "I still want to give you the 20,000, I said, reaching into my jacket pocket where the check was waiting. Carefully folded. "It's all I have, but it's yours." "Mom, no." Chloe reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "Arthur has already taken care of everything. The venue, the catering, the flowers, everything. We don't need your money." "We don't need your money." The words hit me harder than she could have intended. Not, "We appreciate the offer," or, "You're so generous," but, "We don't need it," as if my contribution was simply irrelevant, rather than insufficient. "I want you there," she continued, oblivious to the wound she had just inflicted. "I need my mother at my wedding. Will you walk me down the aisle?" My throat felt thick with emotion. Nothing would make me prouder. "The ceremony is next Saturday, at 3 o'clock, at the Seacliff Manor in Malibu. It's going to be beautiful. Ocean views, about 200 guests. 200 guests. I tried to imagine myself standing in that crowd, shaking hands with Arthur's wealthy friends, making small talk about investments and vacation homes, and all the things that filled their lives, but were completely foreign to mine. "I'll be there," I promised. We talked for another hour, a careful conversation that danced around the deeper issues between us. Chloe told me all about the wedding details, the imported flowers, the live string quartet, the dinner menu that read like a piece of poetry. I listened and nodded and tried to share in her excitement, even as each lavish detail served as a painful reminder of how far outside her world I now was. When we finally stood up to leave, she hugged me properly this time, holding on long enough for me to smell her expensive shampoo and feel how thin she had gotten. "I love you, Mom," she whispered against my shoulder. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know. Outside the cafe, her BMW gleamed in the afternoon sunshine. I walked her to the driver's side, noting the plush leather seats, the pristine interior, and the dashboard that looked like a spaceship compared to my old Honda. "See you next Saturday," she said, sliding behind the wheel. I watched her drive away, her car disappearing into the traffic like a sleek fish, returning to its natural element. Then I was left standing alone on the sidewalk, surrounded by the sounds of wealth and success, feeling both grateful and utterly inadequate. The reconciliation I had dreamed of for a week had finally happened. My daughter loved me again. She wanted me at her wedding, and she had apologized for her cruelty. So why did I feel like I had lost something instead of gaining it back? The drive home from downtown took 45 minutes in the Saturday afternoon traffic, giving me far too much time to replay every word of our conversation. Chloe's apology had been genuine, and her love for me was real, but underneath it all, I could sense the subtle architecture of her new life. A life where my 20-0 was unnecessary, where Arthur's generosity made all of my sacrifices seem insignificant. My house looked smaller when I pulled into the driveway, shabby even. The paint was peeling around the window frames, and the lawn needed mowing. It was the kind of modest, middle-class dwelling that people like Jason probably drove past without even seeing. Inside, I spread the wedding invitation across my kitchen table, studying the elegant script on the heavy cardstock that probably cost more per sheet than I spent on a week's groceries. Seacliff Manor. I had looked it up online. It was an exclusive, members-only club with an oceanfront location, the kind of place where the parking valets likely earned more in tips than I collected from Social Security. Despite Chloe's refusal, I pulled out my checkbook and began to write carefully. 20-0. My entire financial worth, reduced to a set of numbers on a piece of paper. I would attach a note, something simple about how love is more valuable than money, and about my desire to contribute to her happiness. 3 drafts of the note went into the wastebasket before I finally got the wording right. The first version was too sentimental, the second too formal. The third one struck the right balance. For my beautiful daughter on her wedding day. Love, Mom. My best dress hung in the bedroom closet, protected by a plastic dry cleaning bag that crinkled when I touched it. It was a simple navy blue sheath dress, purchased for Robert's funeral, and worn maybe 3 times since. The fabric was quality wool, but the style screamed early 2000s, the kind of dress that would immediately identify me as someone who couldn't afford to keep up with the latest fashion trends. I held it up in front of the bedroom mirror, trying to see myself as Chloe's wealthy new family would see me. The dress was clean, pressed, and dignified in its own way. But next to Jason's designer suits, next to whatever Arthur would be wearing, I would look like exactly what I was, a woman doing her best with very limited resources. The gift envelope also required careful consideration. If it was too casual, it would look like I didn't take the occasion seriously. Too elaborate, and it might seem like I was trying too hard to impress. I finally settled on a piece of cream-colored stationery from a box Robert had given me years ago, tucking the check and the note inside, with the precise care of someone who understood that presentation matters when you have little else to offer. Evening crept across my house like a fog rolling in from the ocean. I made a simple dinner of soup and crackers, and sat at my kitchen table, looking out at Robert's garden. He would have known what to wear to a wedding at Seacliff Manor. He would have helped me navigate the complex social dynamics of wealth and status. Without him, I felt like an actor who had forgotten all her lines. The alarm clock beside my bed showed 9:47 when I finally turned out the lights. 1 week until the wedding. 1 week to mentally prepare myself for a world where my daughter belonged, but where I would forever be an outsider. I lay awake for a long time, listening to the familiar sounds of my old house settling around me. Somewhere in Malibu, 200 people would gather next Saturday to celebrate Chloe's new beginning. I would be among them, wearing my outdated dress and carrying my modest gift, so proud of my daughter, but also acutely aware of everything I couldn't provide for her. The wedding invitation sat on my nightstand, its cream and gold elegance a stark contrast to the worn wood. Tomorrow, I would iron my dress, polish my only pair of dress shoes, and practice making small talk for conversations I would never truly belong to. But tonight, I simply held the envelope containing my 20-0 gift and wondered if love could ever be enough in a world that measured a person's worth in a currency I would never possess. My Honda looked like a rust-colored beetle parked among the gleaming luxury vehicles in the Seacliff Manor parking lot. Mercedes, BMWs, Porsches cars that cost more than I had earned. In my best years with the band, the young valet who took my keys managed to keep his expression neutral, but I caught the slight raise of his eyebrows as he glanced at my car's dented bumper. "Welcome to Seacliff, ma'am," he said politely, handing me a numbered ticket. The clubhouse entrance was all marble and crystal, with floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased an impossible view of the Pacific Ocean. Guests flowed through the space in designer formal wear, their conversations a symphony of confidence and casual wealth. I clutched the envelope containing my gift, suddenly self-conscious of how my simple navy dress stood out, and not in a good way among the impeccably dressed crowd. "Excuse me, are you with the Grant party or the Thompson party?" A young woman with a clipboard and a headset approached me with professional efficiency. "Grant. I'm Evelyn Grant, Chloe's mother." Her expression shifted slightly, a flicker of recognition followed by something that might have been pity. "Of course. Right this way, Ms. Grant. You're at table 12. Table 12 was situated near the back of the reception area, close to the kitchen doors. It wasn't exactly the place of honor for the mother of the bride. But then again, Arthur was the one paying for this elaborate production. I was more of a guest than family here. "And what line of work are you in?" The man seated next to me extended a manicured hand. His watch alone probably cost more than my annual income. "I'm retired," I said, which was technically true. "Oh, wonderful. What did you retire from?" The conversation died as soon as I mentioned my modest pension and Social Security. He quickly turned to discuss real estate investments with the woman on his other side, leaving me to observe the magnificent chaos around me. Waiters in black uniforms glided between the tables, carrying trays of champagne flutes, an elaborate hors d'oeuvre. A string quartet played softly near the ocean view windows. Floral arrangements that must have cost thousands of dollars were displayed, like fragrant sculptures throughout the space. I found myself automatically calculating the costs, a habit I had developed during Robert's illness when every single dollar mattered. The flowers alone represented months of my income. The champagne that was being poured so freely cost more per bottle than I spent on groceries in a week. "Mommy." Chloe appeared beside my table, looking radiant in her flowing white gown. For a moment, she was just my little girl again, the child who used to dance on my feet in our living room while Robert played the piano. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," I managed to say, standing up to hug her carefully, mindful of her elaborate dress and professional makeup. "I'm so glad you're here," she whispered, but her eyes were already scanning the crowd, tracking the dozens of details that required her attention as the bride. "Where should I put this?" I held up my gift envelope, suddenly conscious of its simplicity among the towering display of elaborately wrapped presents near the entrance. "Just put it with the others," she said distractedly, already moving toward the next group of guests who required her acknowledgement. I walked over to the gift table, my cream-colored envelope looking like a child's drawing next to the professional wrapping and elegant ribbons that surrounded it. $20,000, my entire financial worth, reduced to the most modest offering in a sea of extravagant generosity. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats for the ceremony." The crowd began to move toward the outdoor pavilion, where chairs were arranged in perfect rows facing the ocean. I found my assigned seat in the third row from the back, far from the family section where Jason's relatives sat in their expensive fabrics. their postures exuding confidence. The ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and jasmine as the guests settled into their places. Somewhere in this perfectly choreographed production, my daughter was about to marry into a world where my love mattered, but my presence was merely tolerated. The string quartet transitioned into wedding music, and I gripped the program in my hands, watching as Arthur Thompson's world prepared to welcome my daughter permanently into its embrace. Crystal clinked against crystal as the reception began in earnest. I found myself seated at table 12 with distant relatives. I barely recognized second cousins and family friends, who offered polite smiles before turning to more interesting conversations about their vacation homes in Tuscany and their investment portfolios. The dinner was spectacular, each course more elaborate than anything I had eaten in years. Lobster bisque, filet mignon with truffle sauce, and wines that probably cost more per bottle than I spent on food in a month. I ate carefully, conscious of every movement, every sound my fork made against the expensive china. Laughter rippled across the room as stories were shared and toasts were prepared. From the head table, I could see Chloe glowing with happiness. Jason was beside her, looking every inch the successful groom, while Arthur commanded attention at the center of the table, regaling the guests with animated stories that drew appreciative chuckles. When Jason stood up, tapping his crystal glass with a silver knife, the room fell silent with expectation. He looked confident and comfortable, as if he were born for this moment of being the center of attention in a room full of important people. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate this special day," he began, his voice carrying easily across the space. "Chloe and I are so grateful to have family and friends who have supported us on our journey together." Approving murmurs drifted across the tables. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, sensing something in Jason's tone that made my stomach tighten. "Family is everything," Jason continued, his eyes sweeping the room. "And speaking of family, I want to acknowledge someone very special who is here tonight. Chloe's mother, Evelyn Grant." Every head in the room turned toward me. I felt a flush of heat creep up my neck as 200 pairs of eyes focused on my table, on my outdated dress, on the envelope containing my inadequate gift. Evelyn represents something we don't see much of anymore. A person who has learned to live within their means. Jason's smile was bright, seemingly innocent, but his words cut like surgical instruments. While the rest of us are out there chasing success and material things, Evelyn has found contentment in simplicity. Her modest little house, her careful budgeting, her, what would you call it, rustic approach to life? Laughter began to ripple across the room, polite at first, then growing bolder as the guests realized this was meant to be amusing. "In fact," Jason continued, warming to his theme, "when Evelyn generously offered to contribute to our wedding, she brought out her checkbook with the pride of someone offering their very last $20, which, let's be honest, it probably was." The laughter grew louder now. I sat frozen, my face burning with humiliation, as Jason painted me as a figure of gentle mockery, the poor relative everyone tolerates but no one takes seriously. "So, let's raise our glasses to Evelyn Grant," Jason concluded, lifting his champagne flute high. A reminder that happiness doesn't require a large bank account, that love can transcend material success, and that sometimes the greatest gift is simply knowing your place in the world. The applause was thunderous. Guests raised their glasses toward me, their faces bright with patronizing amusement. I was the wedding entertainment, the quaint, poor relative whose struggles made everyone else feel more generous and enlightened. But then, something shifted. From across the room, Arthur Thompson's face had gone pale. He was staring at me with an expression I couldn't identify, a mixture of recognition and disbelief. His mouth was slightly open, his champagne glass forgotten in his hand. "Wait," he said loudly, his voice cutting through the dying laughter. "Wait, just a minute." The room fell silent again, but this time with confusion instead of amusement. Arthur stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. "Aren't you Evelyn Grant? From Crimson Bloom?" Silence crashed over the banquet hall like a wave. Every fork stopped midway to a mouth. Every conversation died mid-sentence. Arthur Thompson stood frozen at the head table, pointing at me with a trembling finger, his face transformed by recognition. "Crimson Bloom," he repeated, his voice louder this time. "The songs Midnight Highway, Broken Dreams, Thunder Roll. That was you, wasn't it?" Other guests began to turn in their seats, studying my face with a new intensity. I heard whispered conversations starting up. Crimson Bloom. That rock band from the 90s? They had, like, 3 number-1 hits. Jason was still holding the microphone, but his confident smile had frozen into something resembling panic. He looked back and forth between his father and me, as if we were speaking a foreign language. "Yes," I said quietly, my voice somehow carrying across the silent room. I was the lead singer of Crimson Bloom. The admission hit the crowd like an earthquake. Chairs scraped against the marble floor as people leaned forward, suddenly seeing me not as the poor relation, but as someone whose music had been the soundtrack to their younger years. "I knew it," Arthur practically shouted, abandoning his table to stride across the room toward me. "I saw you guys at the Forum in '96, front row. You signed my girlfriend's t-shirt." Other voices joined in now, the excitement building like a thunderstorm. "I had all your albums. Didn't you guys sell out Madison Square Garden? Whatever happened to Crimson Bloom?" I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. The room spun slightly as decades of buried memories came crashing back. The screaming crowds, the sold-out venues, the record deals and magazine covers, and the money that had flowed like water. "What happened to the band?" Arthur asked breathlessly, now standing directly in front of me. "I left," I said simply. "When Chloe was born, I walked away from it all. The music, the touring, the recording, all of it." "But why?" someone called out from across the room. "You guys were huge." I looked at Chloe, who was sitting at the head table with tears streaming down her face, finally understanding the true magnitude of what I had sacrificed. "Because being a mother mattered more to me than being famous," I explained. "Because I wanted to be there for every school play, every scraped knee, every bedtime story. Because some things are more important than success." "And your husband's illness?" Arthur said softly, his fanboy enthusiasm giving way to a more human understanding. "I read about that in Rolling Stone years later. You spent everything on his treatment, didn't you?" The room held its breath. "Every penny," I confirmed. "The house, the cars, the investments. Everything went to keeping Robert alive for as long as possible. And I'd make the same choice again tomorrow." Applause began slowly, starting with Arthur and then spreading across the room like wildfire. But this wasn't the patronizing clapping from Jason's toast. This was genuine admiration, respect for a woman who had chosen love over legacy, family over fame. Jason still stood with the microphone in his hand, his face white with shock. The woman he had spent months mocking, the mother-in-law he had dismissed as a failure, was a rock star who had voluntarily given up everything for the very family he was now joining. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur announced, his voice thick with emotion, "we are in the presence of true greatness. Not the kind that comes from money or status, but the kind that comes from sacrifice and love." The applause grew even louder, and guests began to rise from their seats. Someone shouted, "Crimson Bloom!" and others started chanting it. I stood there in my outdated dress, overwhelmed by this sudden reversal of fortune, finally receiving the recognition I had never sought but somehow desperately needed. From across the room, Chloe's eyes met mine through her tears, and in them, I saw understanding, remorse, and something that looked like awe. My daughter was finally seeing me not as the inadequate woman she had grown ashamed of, but as the mother who had loved her enough to sacrifice everything. Through the standing ovation, I watched Chloe rise from the head table, her wedding gown flowing behind her like sea foam as she moved toward me. Tears had streaked her makeup, but she looked more beautiful than she had all day, raw, real, finally seeing me clearly, after years of looking right through me. "Mom," she whispered when she reached me, her voice breaking on the single syllable. I opened my arms, and she fell into them, sobbing against my shoulder just like she had as a child after a nightmare. Her expensive perfume mixed with the salt of her tears, and her designer dress creased against my old one. But none of that mattered now. "Forgive me," she choked out between sobs. I never knew what you sacrificed for me. I never understood." "Sweetheart, there's nothing to forgive," I murmured, stroking her hair the way Robert used to. "I got the greatest gift of all watching you grow up. Every song I didn't write, every stage I didn't perform on, it was all worth it for you." Around us, the applause continued, but it felt distant now, like background noise to this moment I had been waiting 3 long years to experience. My daughter in my arms again, really seeing me, really understanding what our family had meant. Jason appeared beside us, the microphone still clutched in his hand, his face pale with shame. "Ms. Grant," he said, his voice barely audible above the continuing ovation. "Ma'am, I had no idea. I am deeply ashamed of everything I've said, everything I've assumed." I looked at him over Chloe's head, this young man who had spent months diminishing me, and I saw genuine horror in his eyes. It wasn't the embarrassment of being caught, it was the true recognition of the pain he had caused. "You didn't know," I said simply. "That's no excuse." He lifted the microphone with shaking hands. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention once more?" The crowd quieted, sensing the shift in the emotional tenor of the room. "I owe someone a profound apology," Jason continued, his voice stronger now. "Evelyn Grant is not just a rock legend who chose family over fame. She's the kind of person I hope to become, someone who understands that love and sacrifice matter more than money or status. Ma'am, I am honored to call you family." He stepped forward and extended his hand. I shook it firmly, seeing something different in his eyes now. Not the calculating assessment of my worth, but genuine respect for the choices he was only just beginning to understand. "To Evelyn Grant," Arthur shouted from across the room, raising his champagne glass high. "A true hero. To Evelyn," the crowd responded. And suddenly, I was surrounded by people who wanted to shake my hand, to tell me about concerts they had attended, albums they had owned, and how my music had been the soundtrack to their youth. But the most important voice was Chloe's, whispering against my shoulder as we held each other in the center of the storm. "I'm so proud to be your daughter," she said, "and I'm so sorry it took me this long to remember what that really means." The party swirled around us, laughter and music and the clinking of expensive glasses. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged, not because of the applause or the recognition, but because my daughter's arms were around me, and she finally understood the depth of the love that had shaped every choice I had ever made. When we finally separated, Arthur insisted I join the family at the head table, moving chairs to make room for me beside Chloe. As I settled into my new place of honor, I looked across the room at the gift table, where my modest envelope sat among the elaborate packages. $20,000. It was still everything I had, and still not much compared to the wealth that surrounded me. But for the first time, it felt like enough.